Well, Happy New Year, friends. Yeah, good to see you. What a gift it is to gather together and to celebrate this new year here on our first Sunday of 2026. Welcome here. If you're a guest with us or if this is your first time at Lakeview, special welcome to you. We're so glad you're here. My name is Paul, and I have the honor of serving here as the lead pastor. Now, I don't know how your new year has been. Mine has been fantastic, but there's something about me you should know. In January, there's a certain version of January Paul that shows up. The January me, and there's probably a January you as well too, let's just be honest, but the January me is optimistic. January me has plans. January me is convinced that this is the year that finally everything will just line up. And so the January me wakes up and thinks, okay, new resolutions for this year. Okay, I'm going to get organized. I'm going to eat better. I'm going to be more disciplined. I'm going to answer my emails faster. I'm going to be more present. I'm going to journal more. I'm going to read more. I'm going to pray more. I'm going to study the Bible more. I'm going to be just more and do more and see more and more and more and more. It's January Paul. And for a few days, maybe a couple of weeks, January me just works. It's going great. But then life shows up. A busy week, a late night, an unexpected expense, a conversation I didn't plan for. And without realizing, the January me slowly and quietly hands the keys to the everyday me and begins to wonder if I'll ever actually get it right. And perhaps you can relate to that. For many of us, the new year feels full of possibilities, doesn't it? A fresh start, a renewed motivation, a chance to finally do things the right way. And at its core, the desire isn't wrong, right? Which is why January actually feels kind of like a powerful month. January arrives like this reset button, a clean slate. We see the world celebrating. There's fireworks everywhere. There's countdowns. There's world leaders sharing promises. January is just this moment where we believe we can finally get out in front of life instead of just reacting to it. And so almost instinctively, January turns our focus inward. A season where January me steps forward, convinced that if I can just fix me, manage me, improve me, then life will finally work. And many of us have that January me version. I know you do. You know how I know? Because when I go to the gym in January, all of a sudden it's full of people who weren't there in December, and they're using my machines. And when we look at selling data, we see that the self-help books are flying off the shelf. And the debt counselors are getting busy. And the vitamin shops are booming with business because all of our diets are changing in January. Our motivation is high. And that's actually worth paying attention to, because beneath all that effort is a deeper longing. We want a life that feels meaningful. We want a life that feels stable. We want a life worth living. We want to be happy. So we create resolutions we believe will get us there. But here's what we often miss in that pursuit. A life built primarily around managing ourselves and holding everything together on our own doesn't hold very long. No matter how disciplined or intentional we become, the weight of carrying meaning by ourselves eventually wears us down. This is why so many resolutions become like vapor in this time, just disappearing. I mean, some of you have made some resolutions 3 days ago and you're like, it's January 4th, I haven't done any of them. I'm not pointing fingers. But it's reality. We make these resolutions and they kind of just disappear and they leave us feeling like failures, like we just can't measure up and we wonder what's wrong with us. And that's actually where the story of God meets us. Not by calling us into a better version of ourselves, but by drawing us beyond ourselves, towards something sturdier, something more lasting than self-improvement alone. And when the Bible speaks to a life like that, it doesn't offer us a tip, a trick, or a technique. It doesn't give us a shortcut. Instead, it points us to the way of wisdom. Not a life shaped by constant self-optimization, but a life formed by faithfulness, attentiveness, direction, and trust. And so today, on this first Sunday of 2026, we step into a new series we're calling Resolutions. Rather than focusing on surface-level goals or short-lived habits, my hope is that this series will invite us to ask deeper, wiser questions about how to live, who we are becoming, And what story is our life telling? Resolution series will reframe our resolutions not as promises we strain to keep, but as wise, faithful responses to the life God is actually inviting us into. So to help us begin, let's turn to the Apostle Paul and his counsel on what it means to live consistently and well. In the middle, or towards the end of his letter to the Ephesians in chapter 5, right in the middle of it, he kind of gives us this advice of what it looks like to live well and consistently. And he says this: so be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. Make the most of every opportunity in these evil days. Don't act thoughtlessly, but understand what the Lord wants you to do. Be careful how you live. Don't live like fools, but like those who are wise. Okay, well, that's a great resolution right there, right? Live wisely. Don't be a fool. Okay. But what does that actually mean? How do we do that? Does that mean leaning harder into the January me version of life? More discipline, better systems, stronger effort, more pressure, more intensity? Just get it right already? Is that what Paul means when he says live carefully or be careful how you live? I don't think so. That's not what Paul is saying here. Let's take a closer look at these verses and just kind of break them down a little bit. So he starts with be very careful how you live. Now, the phrase he uses here is surprisingly ordinary. In the Greek, it literally means pay attention to how you walk. Pay attention to how you walk. And some translations, if you have a more literal Bible, will literally translate it that way. It'll say, be careful how you walk, which we could take literally about our walking. But of course, there's a broader meaning here, which is why translations vary on this statement. And what I believe Apostle Paul is inviting us into is a life of attentive movement, a way of walking through the world with awareness, wisdom, and intention. What Apostle Paul is calling us to is to pay attention to the direction of our lives. As we start this new year, Paul has invited us to notice what directs our lives, what we're actually giving our time and energy to. After all, walking has a direction. When you walk somewhere, you're going someplace. It has a direction. And our lives also have a direction. How we all live always takes us somewhere. And how we live always tells a story. So perhaps another helpful or more direct metaphor for what Paul is saying here is this: pay attention to what you are giving your time to. Because what we give our time and attention to doesn't just fill our days, it quietly forms us and sets the direction of our lives. Be careful how you live. Or to really get an even deeper sense of what Paul is saying here, it helps to remember the context of this whole letter. You know, I took just some verses out of chapter 5 out of this big letter, out of this letter, but the letter Paul is writing in prison in Rome. His faithfulness has not led him to success as we would define it. It has led him to prison. But despite being in prison, Paul is keenly aware of God's work in his life and the world around him. So much so that he's not dismayed by his circumstance. Rather, he wants the church in Ephesus and us to know and not be confused about that this letter is all about helping us know who we are in Christ and how to live as that kind of people in the world. Everything in this letter flows from that vision, knowing who we are in Christ and how to live as that kind of people in the world. Because when we know who we are, our priorities come into focus, don't they? And when our priorities are clear, our lives begin to move with a purposeful direction. So when Paul calls us to pay attention to how we walk, to what we're giving our time, our energy, and our attention to, he's not telling us to tiptoe through life, be afraid, be careful, don't mess things up. Nor is he giving us some anxiety-driven perfection to try harder this year, do more and more and more. Rather, this is about attentiveness, learning to participate faithfully in the life God has already given us in Christ. Paul isn't trying to make us careful in a narrow sense or anxious sense. He's invited us to be more attentive, faithfully awake to reality as it truly is in Christ. And in doing so, Paul is quietly asking some simple but deeply unsettling questions in this first line. Are you paying attention to the life you're actually living? Be careful how you walk. Are you paying attention to the life you're actually living? And then he says, are you attentive? Are you attentive to what God is doing around you? Because foolishness in the Bible isn't mainly about doing bad things. It is connected to that, but foolishness mainly in the Bible is about living inattentively. It's about living in a way that you're drifting through your days on autopilot, reacting instead of discerning. It's allowing pressure, habit, impulse to slowly turn our attention inward until self-concern quietly becomes the center of our lives. Wisdom, on the other hand, begins with paying attention. It's learning to live awake to time, awake to consequences, awake to God's presence in the ordinary moments of life. It's recognizing that your life is not neutral. Your life is not neutral. And so every choice you make is forming you in some direction. That is, all the small daily habits you repeat are shaping the kind of person you are becoming. Now, this is where the difference between January me approach to life and the story of God invites us to see things a little bit differently here. Because when I hear about the small habits and all the little things that I do form us, the January me begins with this self-resolutions. Okay, well then that's about my goals, my discipline, my improvement, my preoccupations. And so when I think about those daily habits, that's kind of where my mind wants to go. To become a better, more managed version of myself. And then to call that faithfulness. But the story of God is actually doing something different. In God's story, wisdom never starts with self-fixation. It always begins with God. Not with what I can optimize, but with who God is. It always starts with who God is and who I am in relation to Him. And it's from that recentering that our attention shifts away from self-absorption toward God and a life of wisdom. Be careful how you live. It starts with paying attention to what God is already doing in me, around me, in my neighborhoods, in my city, in my province, in my world, and then following the invitation of God to join in. It's about learning how to live well inside God's story, inside the world God is in the process of renewing. Simply, it's all about faithfulness. Paul goes on to say, make the most of every opportunity. Now, to be clear, in light of everything I've just said and the context, the phrase does not mean to do more, right? I like to go there when I read this, but that's not what it means. It's not a resolution. It doesn't mean squeezing more into already full life. Rather, it carries a sense of redeeming time or refusing to waste your life by living half awake, pulled inward by habit, pressure, or self-preoccupation. Paul says these evil days he names, right? It's about redeeming time away from self-absorption. It's about recognizing that time isn't just something you spend, it's something that's forming you. Which is why Paul immediately adds, don't act thoughtlessly. Now, if I'm honest, there are moments in my life, there are lots of moments in my life where I just reach for my phone without even thinking. I'm just going to use the phone example. I think it's one we can connect with. There's no notification, there's no phone call, there's no text, there's no emergency. It's just a quiet impulse. There's a moment I just reach for it. Now, every time I reach for my phone, one pickup of it doesn't change much. But 10 times a day, 10 times an hour, it forms a habit. And a habit becomes a posture. And before long, my attention is shaped before I ever consciously have chosen it. Nothing dramatic has happened, no big failure, just small repeated moments of inattention. And that's how formation works. So Paul is saying, pay attention to your time. Pay attention to your habits. Pay attention to what is actually forming you. Because it's usually the small, unexamined choices we repeat every day, the things we reach for when we're tired, when we're stressed, when we're overwhelmed. Those are the things that are quietly shaping us in who we are becoming. They're setting our direction. So the question isn't just what are you doing, it's what is forming you. And that's why Paul goes on to say, understand what the Lord wants you to do. Now, he's not talking about getting so organized and perfect that now finally, now you can receive some secret hidden plan for your life from God. because now you're finally good enough, because you've measured up on some resolution. No, he's talking about learning to walk in step with God and recognizing what he's already doing around you. To understand, to notice, to look around and see God's active presence in all the small things of my life. Simply, again, Paul's invitation is to be faithful. Because wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about learning how to walk well faithfully over time. To notice, to be awake. That's the invitation here. Not hurry, not pressure, not guilt, not obsession to keep up, but a way of life lived attentively, lived intentionally, lived wisely inside God's story. When we live faithfully, our lives begin to take direction. The way we walk changes. We notice more. We see better. We hear clearer. We slow down enough to notice what God is doing around us and within us. And over time, it is this faithfulness, this faithful way of living that allows God to form and transform us from the inside out, slowly shaping us to become more like him. That's why the Apostle Paul reminds us that we are always being formed by the way we walk through the world, either attentively or inattentively. Paul's warning isn't about crafting better resolutions. It's a reminder that our lives are always being formed. And if we are self-focused, we drift into foolishness. So what do we do with this? What do we do as we talk about resolutions and as we talk about living in wisdom? I'm not here to give you new resolutions or to help you become January me 2.0. Instead, let's take Apostle Paul's wisdom seriously and apply it to our lives. Because to be faithful with how we live is to live wisely, and wisdom always begins with God. So in this new year, in 2026, can I invite you, regarding solutions, to first start with God? Can I invite you in every morning this week, before you reach for the phone or do anything else, just to take a few minutes and ask, God, what are you already doing today? And how can I walk with you in it? And then be still. Let that question form your thoughts and your prayers. Pay attention to what God begins to reveal. And then through the day, keep coming back to that question, as God will show you what he's already doing. God, what are you already doing today? And how can I walk with you in it? And secondly, can I invite you to this? Grow in your faithfulness, not ambition. This week, practice faithfulness in ordinary moments. Pay attention to how you actually spend your time. Notice the habits that quietly have been shaping you. Notice what you reach for when you're tired. What do you reach for when you're stressed? What do you reach for when you're overwhelmed? And ask one honest question as well. What is quietly shaping the direction of my life? What is shaping my life? What are the things I'm reaching for when I feel the most stressed? Where do I go when I feel pressed? What do I do when things are not lining up and all those resolutions become vapor in my life? Where do I go? Pay attention to what's shaping the direction of your life. Now, January me starts with me, right? But wisdom starts with God. Paying attention and walking faithfully starts with God, and his presence adjusts our direction and transforms us. Friends, what if instead of resolutions, what if we started with God and began to live faithfully in what he begins to reveal? You know, faithful sometimes sounds like kind of like, churchy old word maybe. And we can point to a lot of examples of people not being faithful. And we can even say, what's the point? But the story of God seems to reveal to me, and I think it reveals to all of us, that the true transformation, the true change of character, of heart, of direction, can only happen in faithfulness. And faithfulness begins with God. And it begins with us noticing what he's doing in us and around us. God is not inactive somewhere out there on the cloud or whatever. Those are Greek ideas of Zeus's. It's not a Christian idea. God is here with us, present, constantly doing something, which means your life is not neutral, which means all the things that you're doing, or anytime you're on autopilot, you're not really on autopilot. God is doing stuff around us. And we can choose a life of attentiveness and faithfulness and join in, or we can be inattentive, which the Bible calls foolishness. So what if in this year we were careful and paid attention to how we lived? What if we noticed what God is doing and what he's inviting us into? Apostle Paul begins this chapter 5 with these verses. He says, imitate God, therefore, in everything you do, because you are his dear children. Live a life filled with love, following the example of Christ. He loved us and offered himself as a sacrifice for us, a pleasing aroma to God. Before Paul says, be careful how you live, he reminds us the direction of our life is set by who we know ourselves to be. We are invited to imitate God, not to earn love, but to receive it, because we are his dearly loved children. That means the life we are called into doesn't begin with effort or performance or resolutions. It begins with love received.